Hello again, everyone. It's Lauren here and Lisa over there from Art is Moving, and we're doing this Take an Art Break Symposium, Art is a Lifeline. And we're here again with another wonderful art advocate, Denise Wolf. Say hello, hello.
Hello, friends.
So, Denise, I would love to know a little more about you. And how did you get your passion for art therapy? What is the why?
Sure, no problem. Yeah, that's a favorite question. So I am lots of things. Which identity to unpack today, right? I'm an art therapist in private practice, and I'm also adjunct faculty. So I teach at the graduate level at both Drexel and Villanova University here in Pennsylvania. And so the how did you find art therapy story, right? That's a great one. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. So I found my own art making experiences to really be important and communicate things to both myself and others that words couldn't say. Words just couldn't hold it. I'd always been like that arty kid, like geeking out in my room with, like, I don't know, tissue paper and glue for hours. And in adolescence, I really found art to be a really important part of how I connected and communicated. And then in high school, I heard about this magical thing called art therapy and was like, that's what I want to do. So it was a long educational pursuit to be where I am today. Studied art education, psychology, philosophy, because that was really important to me, and then some graduate work in art therapy.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what your work is like as an art therapist or as just a person using art to connect with yourself. Dive a little deeper into that.
Sure. So as my esteemed colleague Juliet King would say, art circumvents the verticality of words, right? So, like, again, this idea that as a therapist, right, like we're sort of emotion translators using words, right, to give language to emotional experiences. And then art therapists, kind of go down another layer or through another layer to using art media and processes for that communication. I don't feel like I answered your question. I feel like I said a bunch of other stuff.
No, that's fine. I'm curious about so everybody has sort of a tool when they are already established in sort of this world of believing in art and understanding the amazing tool it can be for communication with not only ourselves, with other people, and also just a tool for processing something that we might not understand yet. And since you're a practicing art therapist, which is not something I am, and it's not something that Lisa is, tell us, what kind of tools you use to create this sort of line, this lifeline that we're talking about for someone who is in the need of that practice.
Sure. So the short and unsatisfying answer is it depends, right? Or deep ends. And so, but I can do better than that. So it's really a selection of our media and processes that are tailored to the client. So sorry. Shut off my phone. I'm back. Thinking very specifically about what treatment goals are and then what media and processes are going to move them towards that. And our therapists in general we don't have an overarching philosophy of or theory of therapy. So you might find our therapists practicing, from psychoanalysis to transpersonal psychology to CBT. So there isn't like that, holding framework. Where some practicing art therapists are more steeped in metaphor and bringing insight, making words about it, using the art as a jumping off tool. I sit more in the realm of art being this third space or transitional space, right? It's real, but it's not real, right? Like our brains don't know the difference between a dream right? A thought or an imagination and an actual experience. So using that powerful component of art for the participant to engage in that world, right? That they create, that real but not real world. So let me back this up a little bit. The medium process is going to look really different depending on what the client's bringing, what their needs are. From my own practice, I'm more of a generalist because I get really excited about art media, and then I'm like, yeah, I'm a paper maker, and then I like make paper for a long time, and then I'll get really excited about altered books, and I'm like, yeah, I'm doing that now. So yes. Not
Cool.
much of a concrete answer, though, I'm sure.
No. It's interesting. What I'm hearing is you're building a bridge to the subconscious, basically. And so how does that become a catharsis? And how do you guide your client or to that bridge? And how do they understand it? Do you know what I mean? How do they get it?
Mm-hmm. So I'll tell a bad joke, right? How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. But
Oh, I love it. I love it.
The power of any change or transformation is going to happen within the relationship. So there's that fundamental, component. And that can happen through medium processes, right? Through even the offering of art materials becomes an object that's, shared in the relationship and the therapeutic space that gets held. Sometimes there's moments of insight, like definitely have some clients that will notice things in their art, in their own artwork. Like, oh, I always do this, or, make those kind of more cognitive observations. And for other clients, it's more about sensory experiences and being able to titrate to things that maybe are tactilely offensive, and being able to titrate to from wearing gloves to having a hole cut in one of the fingers to, fully being able to have that chalk pastel inside of the seashell kind of feeling. And then using, working through that as a process of mastery of something, right? And then that experience gets generalized. So the catharsis experience, right, can be really cognitive or really body-based.
Okay.
Yeah. So explain the difference between the two, if you can. I know obviously the experience is different for every person, but you can use your own personal story, or you can use something that you have experienced with a client in the past.
Sure. So I operate more from the place of sensory experiences, in the client's own sort of process, rather than kind of, I think some people think that art therapists are kind of like tarot card readers, right? Like, you're going to do a drawing and I'll tell you all about your past. And for sure, there's some ways that we look at artwork as a way of understanding a person, their relational dynamics, the experiences of depression, things like that. So I can talk a little bit about the process of paper making. That's something I've been really interested in lately, as a parallel process to ameliorating trauma, right? So you if we're making paper from, lots of times you make paper from recycled materials, right? Other paper. We'll just kind of simplify that. So you're taking an object and you're decomposing it, you're shredding it, you're tearing it, you're destroying it. And then you're pulping it. So there's this really aggressive process, right? Sifting it, pressing the water out, putting it literally in a frame and decal, right? That's the language. So you're reframing it, and then you are transforming it to create something new. So the experience of trauma, the traumatic event, we go with motor vehicle accident. We'll just go with that one, right? So that we're not erasing it and saying it didn't happen. We're taking those experiences, integrating them, and then transforming them into a new object, which is kind of like how I think about trauma theory, right? Like, who am I now that this event has happened? And what is this world that the event has happened in? And how can I engage in it? So by taking, sort of deconstructing and reconstructing, right? That kind of mirrors that process.
Yeah, what a beautiful symbol of taking something. And I love the notion that you say that you're not basically, it's not like drawing on a piece of paper and then erasing it, right? You're taking the paper and you have the same thing in the end. It's just been reframed, which, it seems so literal and so complex at the same moment. What a simple and complex way of helping someone through trauma and being able to see something in a new way, right? It's like bringing something from inside out into a physical, practical thing that is not practical at the same time. Wow. It's just, yeah.
Right. Yeah. My mentor would say, Ron Hayes would say, like, art therapy is like casting a stone into the pond that goes all the way to the bottom without making any ripples on the surface. So you kind of have that bottom, right, of that like really like symbolic internal, like, wow. And then like, the stone in the pond is the sort of literal, right. And it lives, kind of in both worlds. And I don't need to make that verbal. I think lots of times people like often the need to make it verbal belongs to the therapist. All that is happening internally. And so for me to say to a client, and now you've ameliorated your symptoms of trauma, like,
yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that you're making that clear, that because you're delineating the fact that some people think that that's what a therapist needs to do in order to be a therapist, and it's actually can be a huge mistake at times to do with when you're trying to establish that relationship with someone and that trust, and also the trust in themselves, as opposed to reaching out for someone else to give them the conclusion or the confirmation.
Right, that it comes internally through the process, right? And so we're holding space for those things to happen and guiding it, but not necessarily like leading it, right?
So you're empowering the individual.
Yep.
You're the light on the path potentially, right?
Yes, right, exactly. And there is like a responsibility too of the art therapist to know, of course, what you're doing, the media you're working with, the inherent risks, and also like how the client, may or may not respond. Something like really loose media, like finger paints, right, with a person who is maybe very anxious, let's say. You're like, oh, we're going to finger paint out your anxiety. That can actually like ramp things up, right? That can increase it. So understanding the inherent nature of the media, which as artists, we know, like we collectively know, and then art therapists have a specific language around that.
Yeah. So you mentioned the trauma before, and I saw that you're a trauma-informed consultant. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It's so intriguing to me.
Yeah, so I've worked with Philadelphia Art Museum as a trauma-informed consultant, leading some workshops for their docents, in kind of both in school groups and bringing school groups through, and then also in having teaching tough topics or having discussions with folks around like potentially activating imagery. Degas' interior looks like a lot of sexual aggression, and it's darkly lit, and there's a lot of feels. And so the docents had, noticed that when they're leading groups, or they'll sometimes encounter groups of people, and they'll be having these, kind of like really visceral responses to some of maybe their own personal experiences, and like, oh my gosh, what do I do about that? Also, in terms of how to lead people through the more colonial parts of the art museum, right, which carry such problematic messages. So how do we reform those conversations? And what's the scope of practice, right? Because these are docents, they're not therapists. So how can I hold space for activating imagery, give folks a place to talk about it? Because in lots of ways, that's the function of museums, right? To connect people to themselves, to others, to the history through art making, or art viewing experiences. So, how can docents do that? So, the Philadelphia Museum of Art had identified some of the imagery that they had experienced as being activating, and then we walked through and had conversations.
Wow, fascinating. Go ahead, Lauren. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask if they've ever paired, a work that has given such a strong response to art making itself. Do they ever allow a museum goer to process what they're feeling through the act of making art themselves?
So not the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but there's some other art museums around the country that are hiring art therapists and partnering with art therapists to do just that. I think recently in Canada, doctors have been prescribing patients, medical doctors, to go to art museums, right? There's some museums in New York and Florida and other places in the country, that are partnering to do just that, to have these intentional experiences.
What do you think? So I'm thinking of the difference between seeing something and having a response to it versus doing something and making something, creating something and having a response. What's your experience with the difference between the two of those?
Oh, so seeing something and having, being activated or having a response, it, goes back to what I'd said earlier, that our brains, sort of don't know the difference, which can, and I know I painted that in like it's activating. It can also be cathartic, right? That we can have this other experience, or through resolution of the formal elements, right? We experience catharsis. We look at a great work of art and have this, I feel like, this relief feeling. And that's more sort of visual cortex stuff. Art making itself engages the whole person, right? You have your own kinesthetic sensory experiences, not just an imagined one, but a tactile one. And then there's components of mastery and agency with you as the creator.
It's fascinating. I love that museums are getting art therapists and actually going that route. That paradigm is amazing and beautiful. Because, we always joke, Lauren and I, what people say to paintings, when they look at them and how they kind of like write them off, you know what I mean? My child could do that or something like that. And it's amazing that you can go on an emotional interior journey and show them that, guess what? This is multi-layered,
Yeah, well, I think it would be even interesting if that person who has that response, that's a very visceral response. To reject something right at the beginning, if you could stop and get them to take the time to examine why they're reacting that way, right? Because obviously they're carrying something with them. Perhaps they were 4 and someone told them they couldn't paint. And so they've just carried that luggage with them emotionally forever and ever. And what a beautiful place to be able to process that. I mean, just imagine. Obviously, my wheels are spinning. Imagine if you had a museum. And I know that museums are definitely becoming more interactive. Lisa and I have been trying to get places to be more experiential and interactive with art for a very long time. And I do think that it's much different than it was 10 years ago. And it's very exciting to think of where it might be in 10 years. Imagine if there were tables in front of all the artworks in museums and you could if you just had the feeling of needing to swoosh something around for a while, you could, how beautiful would that be?
Yes, to be able to like process it, internalize it, or share it out,
Share it out.
and like, yeah, being repelled by something is information, in the same way as being attracted to something, right? What it's stirring something in you that's important to pay attention to.
Right.
hmm
Wonderful.
Elaine, I'm going to butcher his name, Alain de Botton, who's a British philosopher, has a lot of theories of art curation, and has talked about this idea that museums should be curated by mood. So,
I love that. Oh my
which
God.
I would love to curate a show like that, right? So,
Right?
like, if you are feeling a lot of ennui, right, then you go into the ennui room and you sit with
Wow.
that, and you know, connect with all that other ennui, and you just kind of like invite it in for tea until it's ready to leave.
It's a
Wow.
wow. That is
Yeah,
amazing. I love
that would
this
be
concept.
yes, I think that would be incredible. So I'm just thinking, as practically speaking, right? You're in art therapy. Have you ever tried to do that for someone that you think might benefit from it? Have you ever tried to create a space, a mood space?
No, not why not? I don't know.
I wonder what would happen. That makes me so curious. Like, what would happen if you did that? Oh, it makes me want to try it now.
Yeah.
Just kind of,
Right, like to cure. I mean, that's a lot of like what I think about too in terms of like emotions that keep knocking, right? We push them away.
yeah.
Oh, I don't want to be angry. And then invite it in for tea, right? The more
Yeah.
you push it away, the more it's going to be insistent. It needs some time with you.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to do that with intention. I've done that in teaching and had, you know, students or participants curate a room with intention, you know, as a teaching tool, but not as a therapeutic tool. So thank you.
Oh,
I love
yeah,
it.
no, you know what I mean? I'm thinking of my own children. So my children were last week, I could tell that there was something inside them that they needed to get out. And so I just hung up, I actually thought of Lisa, and I hung up a piece of paper as big as they were. And I was like, have at it. And they, you know, they were just, and they went all in for it. And it hung in our space for a couple of days. And it made me think of that. Like, did we transform the room into this space that carried our emotions but in a healthy way, right? Because the next morning, what my oldest son came in and he told me what colors were representative of what emotions he was feeling at the time. And so he had the night's sleep to process what he had gotten out of his body. And so, like, imagine if you walked into a room and it was just covered in paper and someone invited you to create an emotion room, and just whatever emotion needed to get out of your body, just put it up there. And then someone else can come. I mean, that's what a museum is. That is what a museum is, right? It's just that a lot of people don't experience museums that way.
Right.
I mean, you're right about that. Museums are not only our history carries a lot of emotion.
Oh, yes.
And so we need to process that emotion, and we don't need to hide it away. We need to confront it and admit what it makes us feel, and then talk about how it makes us feel, and then move on, right? Just rip it apart, put it back together, and then reframe it, and then
Yep.
go on with it, right?
Yep.
Gosh, I just, oh wow, I'm so excited. This is such an inspiring conversation. I want to do 20 things now.
I know, right? I got my list. I'm ready. Let's go. And then we'll
It's like,
curate a big show. Yeah.
museums are centers for well-being. Beautiful, beautiful. So last question, I believe, is like, how do you feel, or how is art a lifeline?
Oh my gosh. I wish y'all could see my desk because it's like surrounded by all sorts of art supplies. I am driven, right, to make art. Again, to communicate with myself, to connect with my own self. I'll use my own different parts of my art making to reflect on my work with my clients, as ways to process sort of my own connections or identifications, as well as, you know, what might be beneficial to their treatment. The joy of making art, right? Like
Mhm.
that's one of my favorite treatment goals. Art making fosters joy. Um, so
Love it.
to do that as a way to just kind of what Picasso, right? Brush off the dust of everyday life.
Mhm.
And then have this tangible, externalized object to remind me, oh, that was the day I did this or felt this. Um, so it's grounding and joyful.
Love it.
Love it.
Love it.
Wow. Thank you so much. What a
Yes.
wonderful conversation
Mhm.
this was. I'm definitely going to be coming back to this one and jotting down notes for like the next art project I want to head up in my little town here. So thank you so much
Thank
for taking
you.
the
For sure. Thanks for this opportunity to share.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And